I spent last weekend running a model that likely cost Google billions to develop, and I did it on my own laptop for free with no subscription and no API key. Now, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Companies don't give away things that take years and billions of dollars to develop. That's not how anything works. Pharma doesn't hand out cancer drugs after a decade of R&D, and Google itself sure as hell isn't giving away top search results for free, which is why they sell ads to get those spots. So why Gemma? If you look at the average tech blog, you'll get something about developer goodwill, open source values, or competing with Meta. But in my opinion, the actual answer is way more strategic. And once I started looking at it, I'd argue this is one of the most calculated moves any AI company has made in the last 2 years. Here's what I think is actually going on. Google isn't being generous, they're racing to make AI a utility. And the company that wins the race to commoditize a thing isn't the one that makes the thing. It's the one that owns the infrastructure underneath it. That's their bet. In this video, I'm going to walk you through why I think Google is the only major AI lab that wants this to happen, what OpenAI and Anthropic are doing instead, and where it leaves you if you're building or using AI right now, because I think this may change how you should be thinking about your stack. Okay, here's the lens you need. Forget AI for a second. Every major technology in history follows the same path. It starts as a premium product, then becomes a feature, then becomes a utility. Bandwidth used to cost a fortune, now it's a flat fee. Computing power used to be sold by the mainframe, now it's a commodity you rent by the second on AWS. Electricity went through it too. The first electricity companies sold light bulbs and generators as a package because that's where the value lived. By the time the grid was built out, all the value had moved to the wires underneath. Premium thing becomes feature, becomes utility, and every time it happens, the value flows downward, away from whoever made the thing towards whoever owns the infrastructure it runs on. I'm convinced AI is in the middle of this transition right now. The model itself is becoming a commodity. What you can do with the model is still where most of the value lives, but the model layer is getting cheaper every month. Open weights are getting better every month. The gap between the best closed model and the best open one is also getting narrower. So if you're a Google and you're looking at this trend, you have a choice. You can fight the commoditization, which is what OpenAI and Anthropic are doing, or you can lean into it, accelerate it, and capture the layer underneath. That's the call Google made, and it appears Gemma is how they're making it happen. Here's the thing I don't see anyone really pointing out. Of all the major AI labs, Google is the only one I think who actually wants AI to commoditize. Everyone else is fighting it. Think about who makes the money and where. OpenAI charges per token, Anthropic charges per token. Their entire revenue comes from being the model. If model weights become free, OpenAI and Anthropic don't have a business. That's probably why you'll never see GPT-5 weights leaked legitimately. For anyone who doesn't know, model weights are basically the AI itself in file form. If you have the weights, you can run the model on your own hardware without ever touching OpenAI's servers. The model is the product. If I had to call it, commoditization is an extinction event for them. Google is not in that position. Google's biggest AI revenue source isn't model API calls. It's Google Cloud. Last quarter, Google Cloud did $17.7 billion in revenue with $240 billion in committed contracts on the books. That's their business. The model is the bait. The infrastructure is what Google actually wants to sell you. When you download Gemma, you might run it on your laptop for testing, but the moment you want to do anything serious with it, you need GPUs you don't have, you need infrastructure, and Google has positioned Gemma to run beautifully on Google Cloud, on Google's TPU chips, with first-party tooling that makes the whole thing feel very easy. The model is free, but the rails are not, and that's their whole play. It gets better when you remember Google also owns Android, Chrome, and Pixel. The smaller versions of Gemma are designed to run directly on phones and inside browsers. Google is the only company that can ship a free model that strengthens its cloud business and its device business at the same time. And there's a layer most people don't even see. Google doesn't just own the cloud, Google owns the silicon. Those TPU chips that Gemma runs on were designed in-house, manufactured specifically for Google's workloads, and they cost Google a lot less than buying NVIDIA H100s at retail. Every other major AI lab is paying NVIDIA for compute. Google effectively pays itself. That matters because the cost of running models is dominated by silicon. If you can shave 30 to 50% off your inference cost because you own the chips, you can absorb pricing pressure that would otherwise crush an NVIDIA-dependent competitor. Google has the only fully vertical AI stack in the industry. Models, software, chips, data centers, all under one roof. Gemma is just the front door into that stack. So when people ask, isn't Google cannibalizing Gemini by giving Gemma away for free? They're asking the wrong question. The way I see it, Gemma isn't taking customers from Gemini. It's taking customers from companies that don't have Google's infrastructure to fall back on. It's eating OpenAI's lunch and Meta's lunch while pulling those users into Google's stack. The thing that makes this whole picture more interesting is what the other major AI labs are doing while Google plays his hand. Because OpenAI and Anthropic aren't sitting still. They've each made a choice, and the three choices look nothing like each other. OpenAI is mostly trying to stay closed. They did release a couple of open-weight models in late 2025. They called it GPT-OSS, but those were positioned a tier below their best frontier model. And they shipped GPT-5 fully closed 2 days later. The pattern is consistent. OpenAI will throw a bone to the open community when political or competitive pressures forces their hand, but the actual frontier stays locked behind an API. Their bet is that the frontier model is so valuable that being the company with the best model is worth more than any ecosystem play. They're charging a premium and they want to keep charging a premium. As long as the gap between the frontier model and the open weights is big enough, that bet works. Anthropic has gone even further in the opposite direction. They've never released open weights, not a single model. And they don't seem to want to. Their recent moves have leaned even harder into restricted access, keeping their most advanced capabilities internal or sharing them only with a small number of vetted enterprise partners. Anthropic's bet is that safety is the moat. If you're the company with the most trusted frontier capabilities, you win the customers who care most about what happens when those capabilities get used. Banks, hospitals, defense contractors. The customer's willing to pay a premium for trust. So you've got the three labs making three completely different bets. Google bets on infrastructure and commoditization, OpenAI bets on the frontier itself, and Anthropic bets on trust and safety. None of these are wrong in my opinion. They're just three different views on where the value is going to land. But notice something. Of the three bets, only one of them depends on the model layer staying premium. Anthropic's bet works whether the model's commoditized or not. Trust transcends the cost of the underlying model. Google's bet actively benefits from commoditization. Only OpenAI is on the wrong side of this trend if I'm right about where this is going, which makes their next few moves the most interesting to watch. There's another piece of this that's specifically about China, and I'd be missing something if I didn't address it. Over the last 18 months, Chinese AI labs have been quietly winning the open weight game. Qwen, DeepSeek, Moonshot, Z.AI, these labs have shipped open models that genuinely compete with the Western frontier, and Western enterprises noticed. Airbnb famously moved a chunk of their AI workload from OpenAI to Qwen because at their volume the math was just too obvious. That's a problem for Google, but it's also a problem for the US tech industry generally. If you're a European bank or a US healthcare company and your best self-hosted option is a model trained in China, that's a procurement headache, a national security risk, and a PR mess all at once. Compliance teams hate it, boards hate it, and government regulators are starting to hate it. Gemma is Google planting a flag in that space. A Western open-weight model with an Apache 2.0 license, no Chinese supply chain risk, and enterprise guarantees attached. For any company that was about to deploy Qwen or DeepSeek and got cold feet, Gemma is the off-ramp. And Google quietly becomes the default Western answer to the question that until recently only Chinese labs are really answering. This isn't the whole story. I think the commoditization angle is bigger, but the China piece is real and it's part of why Google moved when they did instead of waiting. You might be thinking, hold on, enterprises can already run closed models privately. OpenAI signed a Pentagon deal, banks deploy GPT through Azure, so what's actually different here? Fair, and worth answering directly. Yes, you can run a closed model in a private cloud configuration where your data isn't being used for training. That's definitely real. But the economics don't change. You're still paying per token, you're still locked into the provider's pricing, and you're still renting access. You don't own the model. Open weights are different in a way that's easy to underestimate until you actually run the numbers. The marginal cost per token collapses to electricity. You can fine-tune without sending your data anywhere. You control when and whether to upgrade. If the company that released the model disappears tomorrow, your deployment keeps running. For a startup spending $2,000 a month on API calls, none of that really matters. Convenience wins, but for a company spending $2 million a month, and there are more of those every quarter, the math eventually tips. That's the customer Google is targeting. And I don't think that customer is going to be rare in 3 years. Okay, let me get to the part that matters if you're actually building something or using AI on a daily basis. I've been running Gemma on my own setup, and to save you the suspense, for most builders right now, you should not switch. Here's the honest math. If you're spending under $5,000 a month on AI APIs, the convenience of OpenAI or Anthropic absolutely beats the operational overhead of self-hosting. You'd be trading a usage bill for an infrastructure bill, and the infrastructure bill comes with engineering time you probably don't want to spend. So stay where you are and get the product to market. If you're scaling past $20,000 a month, this is where the math at least starts to flip. The cost crossover is real. I've seen teams cut their AI bill by 70% by moving high-volume workloads to a self-hosted Gemma deployment for the parts of their stacks that don't need frontier intelligence. Stuff like classification and retrieval. That doesn't need GPT-5. It needs a model that's good enough and cheap enough. The migration is definitely more painful than people make it sound, by the way. There's a whole engineering tax around running your own infrastructure that most posts conveniently leave out. But once it's running, your cost per call drops by an order of magnitude and you stop sweating every API price hike. Here's what I'm actually doing in my own stack for context. I'm going to keep Claude and GPT-5 on the front end where reasoning quality matters. Anything user-facing, anything that involves multi-step planning, and anything where the cost of being wrong is high. I plan to run Gemma on the back end for the high-volume work that doesn't need a brain that can write a novel. The kind of work where I need a model that's fast, cheap, and reliable, where good enough is genuinely good enough. The volume difference between those two layers is the whole game. The user-facing reasoning calls models might happen 1,000 times a day. The backend classification work might happen 100,000 times a day. If you keep paying frontier prices for that 100,000, you're burning money. Move that volume to a self-hosted Gemma deployment and the math changes immediately. The thing nobody tells you is that this kind of split architecture is also a hedge. If OpenAI doubles their API price tomorrow, the part of my stack that's already on Gemma is insulated. If the new Gemma model releases and beats Gemini 2.5 Pro, I can swap the backend without touching the front. I think this is going to be the default architecture for AI native companies in 2 or 3 years. Not which AI is the best, which AI is best for the job. Here's the meta lesson. 2 years from now, the question for every AI native company isn't going to be which AI is the best, it's going to be which workloads need the frontier and which ones just need a model that's cheap and good enough. That's a stack design question, not a vendor question. Google is positioning for a world where every company has to answer it. And in my opinion, they want to be the cloud you run both halves on. The model layer commoditizing isn't the end of anything, it's the start of the next phase. When the model becomes a commodity, the value shifts upward to whoever's wrapping it in something genuinely useful. The data you've collected, the way you've designed the product, the trust you've earned with users, none of that lives inside the weights. All of it lives in whoever's building the actual thing. This is actually great news if you're a builder. The cost of raw intelligence is collapsing. What's left is the part that requires judgment and product sense, and that's the part you can actually win at. I think Google making Gemma free is the loudest signal yet that the model layer is heading towards zero. If I had to predict, the companies still trying to charge premium API prices in 5 years are going to look like the companies that tried to charge for email in the late 90s. Now, I should be honest about where this analysis could break, because it's not a sure thing. There's a scenario where the model layer doesn't commoditize, where the gap between frontier and open weight stays big enough that the premium API businesses stay healthy. If GPT-6 turns out to be such a leap forward that nothing open weight can touch it, OpenAI keeps their pricing power and Google's bet looks early. That's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I'd be misleading you if I told you the trend is guaranteed. The other risk is regulatory. If governments start treating frontier models like nuclear technology and put export controls on weights, the open weight ecosystem slows down dramatically. Gemma exists because Google can choose to release it. If that choice gets taken away, the whole strategy changes. So the bet I'm describing isn't a sure thing. It's a directional read on where the market is going based on the patterns I see. If I'm wrong, I'll be wrong loudly and you can come back and tell me. But if I'm right, free models are just the opening move. Google making Gemma free is then positioning for a world that doesn't fully exist yet, where the model is a commodity and the infrastructure is the prize. They're betting that whoever owns the infrastructure when the dust settles owns the next decade of compute. That's the play, and that's why Gemma is free. If you want to actually run Gemma yourself and see what self-hosting feels like, the link's in the description. And if you want more videos like this where I break down what's actually happening behind the AI moves people are talking about, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of these coming. Thanks for watching.